If you love the Mental Health Warriors podcast, please share it with people because it helps us spread the word and build the community. And it's probably the single most important thing you can do to help us get our message out. So if you love the episodes and are willing to share it, I would be so grateful because you could directly change somebody's life forever. And that's really what this is all about. So in this week's episode, though, I want to talk to you about Michael Schratter. So this guy is freaking cool, man. He's a teacher in Vancouver and a columnist, and he deals with bipolar disorder. So on August 2010, he decided to do, just ride 40,000 kilometers around the world across 6 continents and 33 countries on his bicycle. Along the way, he's raising awareness about mental health issues by sharing his own struggles with bipolar and encouraging others. And then the guy comes home. It's funny, we talk when he came back to Canada. He landed back in Canada and he still had like 7,000 kilometers to go. So it was funny. In the episode, we talk about how when I took the kids to Disney World a few years ago, and we got to the border of Florida, and I thought that we were like basically on the way to Disney World, and but there was still like three and a half hours to go. So I know what that was like for me. So to just land on the shores of Canada and have like just a mere 7,000 kilometers to go would be, a bit of an emotional hurdle to overcome. But anyways, he did it, and he's a great guy. And his initiative. An amazing adventure started a movement called Ride, Don't Hide, which is something I participated in this year, and it was a ton of fun, and you meet so many nice, amazing people. So, and Michael talks about that in the podcast, so I won't spoil the surprise. But thanks, Michael. Thank you for your amazing journey and taking action to make a difference. And you've started a freaking movement, brother. And it is awesome, spreading around the country. And it was you taking action, taking on a massive challenge, and talking about it along the way that made this happen. So, love this story. Thank you for what you're doing, man. And any way we can support you on the Mental Health Warrior Show, we will. So, guys, enjoy the episode. I know you're going to love it. Michael's a great storyteller. And remember, share the show. It can change the world.
Warriors are not born. Warriors are forged in the crucible of adversity. Warriors without fear are warriors without courage. We are men, destroying stigma and stereotypes. We are a band of brothers, because in brotherhood there is strength. Our weapons are strength, empathy, and honesty. We are Mental Health Warriors, and this is our voice.
And we are back with another episode of the Mental Health Warriors podcast. Michael, how's it going, my friend?
Very good. Thanks for having me on.
Oh, it's an honor to have you on the show. I know the guys in the Mental Health Warriors community and our audience will be very interested in hearing about your journey. And I wanted to tell you that based on our conversation, and I'm sure we'll get into more of this later, but I did the Ride, Don't Hide this it was about a month ago, I guess, June 25th, I think it was. And
Yeah, that's great.
yeah, what a wonderful event. It was funny. It was pouring rain and I was sitting at home going, oh my God, should I do this? God, how committed am I? Like I was really starting to wuss out. And then just as I was agonizing over it, the skies parted and the sun came out, and I guess that was probably not a coincidence. So
Awesome. What ride did you do in what town?
I did it in London, Ontario, and I did the 30-kilometer ride. I did it on a unicycle actually. So, and the funny part was I rode 20 kilometers before that in the pouring rain, got home and was like, oh my, it was actually right around the corner from my house where the ride was. So I got home and I was like, oh my God, I don't think I can do another 30 kilometers on my unicycle in the pouring rain. Then that's when the sun came out. So I went and did that. So.
Oh, good for you. Good for you.
Yeah. So why don't we get right into it, man? So how about you tell us maybe a little bit about the Michael of right now and maybe some of your backstory so we can get to know who you are.
Sure. I am 48 years old, married with 2 kids. I'm a teacher here in Vancouver with the Vancouver School Board. Have been for oh gosh, I guess the last 17 years. And I grew up in BC. I grew up in the Okanagan in the small town of Vernon. And, back in the early 80s, mental health just wasn't something that was really readily talked about. And there was a lot more stigma associated with mental health challenges. And I went through some emotional turmoil, some depression, some mania, and I was diagnosed with bipolar disorder. And there was a episode. Luckily, my last episode was back in 1990. Back in 1996, my dad had just unfortunately died in a bicycle accident. So a little bit of background. Come from a recreational cyclist. My mom and dad would cycle to work. We would do family trips together in Europe on bicycles, around the Okanagan and BC on bicycles, and that bad luck would just befall my dad, and he ended up dying commuting home from work. And the following year at UBC, I had a manic episode, and the idea of Ride Don't Hide occurred to me then in '96, and I was surrounded with loving, supportive, educated family and friends that really helped me get out of the hospital quick. But there was still this notion that I had something to hide and be ashamed about. The advice was sort of, why don't you make up some sort of white lie as to why I had to drop the terms, classes at UBC. And the idea of Ride Don't Hide was born then, that there's got to be the stigma's got to end. The stigma's got to end for the real healing to occur.
Mm-hmm.
And growing up in BC, I was very much a witness to. I was very young, but I remember Terry Fox and just what an impression he made on me as he ran through my town, and that impression of even though I've got a disability, I'm still a man, and I've got a lot to contribute to society, and just look beyond my disability. And then later with Rick Hansen, the same idea, look beyond my wheelchair. And by the time Rick Hansen did his, sort of extraordinary physical feat, I by then realized I was dealing with mental health issues, with my emotional sort of ups and downs. And so that whole thing with Rick Hansen really appealed to me. So the idea of doing a sort of over-the-top physical act, a circus show, if you will, to get media attention and get people sort of paying attention to your cause, that's by no means my idea, but it is very much a Canadian sort of BC idea, as Rick Hansen and Terry Fox both came out of British Columbia. So that was it. I mean, I combined my love for cycling, but I'd already cycled across Canada by myself once when I was younger, and I knew I could do long distance cycling, and I knew I wanted to draw attention to the absurdity and the inhumanity of mental illness stigma. It was just a matter of putting it into action. And so in '96, I mean, I finished my school, I become a teacher, and this idea of cycling around the world with Ride Don't Hide it would flesh out every couple of years, but I never really had the courage, the balls, whatever you want to call it, to actually make it happen. And then I met the right woman, and she's now my wife and the mother of our two children. And Deborah really liked the idea. And in 2010, we turned it into action. It was very much the grassroots thing. She managed it from the corner of her desk while working full time at a regular job. In 2010, I left, and it took me 16 months to solo cycle around the world through 33 countries, 6 continents, to do the equatorial distance around the planet, which is 40,000 kilometers, which is what Rick Hansen did as well. And to try to do those 40,000 kilometers equally amongst all the continents except Antarctica. So that's how Ride Don't Hide began. And at the time, I was a part-time journalist, and I got a leave from the Vancouver School Board. They granted me a leave. They really believed in the campaign. And I got the Canadian Mental Health Association behind it, and they believed in it, and they were They were the nonprofit associated with the funds I was raising. And my editor at the newspaper I was working for, he allowed me to write a column every 2 weeks from the road. And those columns that I wrote from the road were very much about mental health issues and policies that I was witnessing in the countries that I was cycling through. And I think it was that column that came out every 2 weeks in a Vancouver newspaper that really kept the 16 months real. I think without a proper PR campaign, I would have sort of disappeared out of sight, out of mind. But the column every 2 weeks really kept it alive back in Vancouver. And it just unbelievably crescendoed as I landed in Halifax from Morocco and did the last leg across Canada. You know, we had been picked up by media before, but the amount of media attention as I did those last 7,000 kilometers coming home from Halifax really, really crescendoed. And upon coming home on November, I guess it was November the 12th, 2011, the Canadian Mental Health Association and I quickly made the decision to turn it into an annual event. And what I mean by an annual event is not that we were going to cycle around the world every year, but rather communities would have their own Ride, Don't Hide, with the notion that come out, don't be afraid, get some exercise, show your face. Basically, the name says it all. Ride, Don't Hide, like don't hide. And that first June, we had 2 cities in British Columbia that took part. And then the following June, you know, we had like 12 cities. And we just finished, as you said, Jason, we just finished our Ride, Don't Hide for 2017 on June the 25th. It's always the last weekend in June before the Canada Day long weekend. And we had a record number of 30 cities across 6 provinces. We had about 10,000 Canadians participating, and it raised $1.6 million on the day.
Wow.
So it's now become Canada's largest mental health sort of advocacy event. And
that's awesome.
Yeah.
Wow.
So the philosophy behind it, what gave me the courage, the gall, I guess, the audacity to attempt this is, as a journalist and as a teacher, my job is to tell a story to an audience, right? My students, or in the newspaper's case, the reader in the newspaper. Now, it's supposed to be objective, right? And hopefully it is, but generally life is interpreted through stories. And it really occurred to me that the story of mental illness was being told by a false, very, very dark, and quite often very violent story. And that is the Hollywoodization of mental illness up until very recently, which has turned positive. But, for the longest time, mental illness was portrayed as dangerous, murderous. It was, the whole slasher genre, the whole, Friday the 13th, it all started actually with Hitchcock and Psycho with Anthony Perkins. That's how mental illness was interpreted, in Rosemary's Baby, some forgetful, hysterical woman, right? So that it was either violent or it was just over the top. And because there's no because of the stigma, there was no mental health education going on in schools or in society. It was a shut down conversation. So we are always trying to interpret our world. And so even though we recognize these movies as fiction, they still do this implicit education on our youth, right? And then it's reinforced, unfortunately, and I used to work as a journalist, if it bleeds, it leads. And that means basically, anything violent, anything that's fearful is always on the front page. It's always what leads the news because, we've evolutionary, through natural selection, we pay attention to things that are dangerous. And so news always captures on that. So again, the only time a person with a mental health challenge, still to this day, unfortunately, makes the news is when some statistical outlier, some, horrible thing happens and someone, does something horrible at work or to their family. And it's really, truly a statistical anomaly. But it's the only time, mental health challenges make the news. So you've got this real negative reinforcement with the news that's supposed to be objective and truth-telling that reinforces the fiction that you see in the Hollywoodization of mental illness. And then, at least out here in Vancouver, you know, this is all reinforced with something like the downtown east side, where you see homeless people, you know, eating leftover food from dust bins and sleeping on the streets with rats, and you know, and that's very objective. You're seeing that with your own eyes if you live in Vancouver. So you've got this very dark and depressing and often violent education of what mental illness looks like, that is reinforced with the entertainment industry, with the news industry, and with the failing of the social safety net with the downtown east side. And that causes the stigma. It is no wonder that men, very capable men like, you know, that you have in your group, Jason, and women choose to stay silent, because they do not want to be associated with these very real and fictitious stereotypes. And so you end up having everyday Canadians that are dealing with a mental health challenge staying silent. But in turn, by them staying silent, this reinforces the stigma, because the only narratives that are being told in society are those three negative ones that I was just talking about. Up until very recently, people were staying silent. And that in that vacuum, again, the education that's being taught is very dark, and it just becomes this self-fulfilling perpetual sort of cycle of this very strong stigma. So that's where I sort of got the notion that as a journalist and as a teacher, I have an obligation to try to tell a different story. And it was that sort of idealism that gave me the courage to not only come out of the closet, but to come out of the closet in a very big, dramatic way, and try to cycle around the world. And to be honest, the cycling around the world part didn't scare me at all. The first day that I wrote in a Vancouver newspaper that I'm bipolar, up until that point, only my immediate friends and family knew. That was the scariest day of my life. It wasn't hopping on the bike.
Wow,
it was, you know, to acknowledge that.
There's so much to unpack there. Holy shit. So one thing I wanted to say was, you know, it's funny. First of all, I feel like I need to renounce or give up my Canadian citizenship, because I did not know Terry Fox was from BC. But I can just imagine what it was like. I know when I drove to Florida with the kids, you know, and we're driving down there, we cross the Florida border, and I'm like, we're going to go to Disney World. And I'm like, oh my God, we're across the border. We're almost there. And we're like, no, we're not almost there. There's still like 3 or 4 hours to go because Florida's so long. So I can just imagine you coming back from Morocco being like, hey man, we're just, you know, back in Canada. This is great. 7,000 kilometers to go.
Yeah.
So I just want to ask one more question then I'll turn it over to Brian. But so to take this kind of way back, when you were young, how did you know, or what happened, or when did you start to realize that, you know, sort of emotionally that you were different, or that there was some kind of issue happening?
Well, I was very close to my dad, but he was probably a little bit too honest and a little too abrupt. And I was a pretty hyper kid, and I think at one point, you know, he would really come down hard on me for you know, my behavior, as all fathers can, and sometimes overdo it. So that started to give me an idea, you know, why was I always getting in trouble and my brother wasn't? And then I think at some point I learned, I guess I literally was about 8 or 9 years old, about the term mental illness. And I asked my dad about that, and he again was probably a little too honest and said, you know, we have bipolar traits on our side of the family, on my father's side of the family. And he was talking to me about my uncles and my aunts, and they grew up in Austria, and it was, you know, very Freudian back then. Mm-hmm. And a lot of educated people. My dad was a really bright guy, a cold temperature nuclear physicist, if you can believe it. And so he was mildly bipolar, and his father, my grandpa, was a very successful dentist, and he was bipolar. And so there was a lot of sort of cynicism in regards to this sort of Freudian thing, you know, Oedipus complex, this, you're in love with your mom, your dad, blah, blah, blah. So my dad really had no time for the idea of the mental health field and psychiatry. It was always at least that was dealt with his generation and my uncles and such. It was something that was handled within the family, and it was sort of very secretive and very, very private. And so that's how it was introduced to me, that I have these genes in me that give me a bipolar predisposition. And other than just being hyper and being diagnosed with ADHD, I hadn't really, displayed any sort of bipolar episodes, but I was always getting in trouble in school, and I was very up and down and very, very energetic. And then it was at 19, I had a depressive episode where I unfortunately made an attempt at my life, but fortunately screwed that up and didn't succeed in my killing myself. And that's where I realized, okay, that was the sort of the big moment where I realized I'm dealing with something a little bit more than just ADHD. And it was also at that point my dad realized that it wasn't something that we could just keep as a secret and keep within the family, that I did need some help. So that was, when I was 19, I mean, God, that was like, we're talking 1990, what is that? 1989, 1988. I don't have actually another mental health episode until after my dad dies in the bicycle accident, which was in 96. So I go, I guess, seven years without anything, and then I have this manic episode in 96 while at UBC, and then the idea of Ride Don't Hide is born, actually in a state of mania. I mean, it was a pretty outrageous idea, but it all kind of clicks to me that everyday average Canadians that are dealing with a mental health challenge have to stop hiding in order for there to be a counter narrative to the negative storytelling that I told about in great detail before. So those were sort of these sort of mental health punctuation points, exclamation marks in my life, I guess at age 18, 19 with the depressive episode, and then a manic episode at age 25, 26. Are you guys there?
I'm still here. I'm still here,
Go ahead,
Mike.
Brian. Go ahead, Brian.
Oh, okay. Okay. No, sorry. It sounded like we got disconnected there for a sec. Sorry.
I think we did. Yeah.
Okay.
I also want to say, guys, like, by no means, everything's on a spectrum, right? I and you guys probably know people as well. Like, Jason, you talked a bit about your late partner. People are afflicted in different ways. I mean, I've got a friend, Les, who can't hold a job longer than a month and is on a disability and is, lands himself in the hospital or in prison, it seems like once or twice a year. His bipolar is so extreme. My bipolar, for whatever reason, is a bit more minor. It's called hypomania, actually, at a sort of mild level. And so, it's the same with depression. It's the same with anxiety. Some people can be afflicted with something like anxiety and they can't even get out of their house, while another person can kind of work through it and get through whatever they're anxious about and get on with their day and perform quite well. So I don't pretend to have it rough in any way, and I certainly don't pretend to it's not a particularly exciting story. My mental health episodes and my life outside of Ride Don't Hide, it wasn't a sad story or I had great loving parents. I don't have any particularly traumatic do you know what I'm saying? Like, I'd be lying if I were to exaggerate that.
Sure. Yeah. No, I totally get it. I mean, in Cindy's case, she was obviously on a far more extreme end of the spectrum, right? I mean, it sounds like a lot like your friend, like just basically non-functional for a lot of the time, right? She had moments of lucidity and I mean, usually it was when she would transition between depression and mania or vice versa. She'd either be, climbing to the sky or coming down. And there was it seemed to me like there was that moment in the middle there where she would have, some moments or periods of somewhat brief periods of, being lucid and like the Cindy that I remembered. But yeah,
Yes.
definitely a spectrum. So you haven't had an episode of like a manic episode or depressive episode since 1996?
Exactly. Yeah. So typically once a year, I go through a sort of a hypomania phase. It tends to be around spring. It's more light, a little bit more hyper, a little bit more accelerated speech, more accelerated ideas and fleeting of thought. But thankfully, it doesn't get into a full blown mania a state. Now, a couple times I came close. My wife and I, Deborah, lost our first pregnancy a couple years back at 5 months, so it was really quite late. And this really threw, my wife and I for a loop. And I started to get agitated, and my wife knows me enough to sort of say, hey, do you think you have some mania starting to build in you? And that's where I think I'm very lucky, is I have this open relationship with my wife and my brother. Prior to meeting her, my brother was sort of my objective litmus test that could objectively look at my behavior and tell me if I was being off or not. And so at that point I take some lithium, and that thing that was sort of seemingly looked like it was going to be built into some mania, just comes right back down. And so I'm pretty fortunate that way. It tends to be some catalyst, something very stressful, I guess, can sort of trigger me off into a sort of an extra hyper phase. And then if it seems to be going beyond that, medication quickly brings it back down.
Hey, Brian, I got a question for you. So, I mean, Michael's, I don't know if you know Brian's story, but he's a police officer and, very traumatic event and suffered like a 7-year battle with post-traumatic stress. But I guess my question for you is...
Sorry to hear that.
Yeah, you've mostly overcome, the battle with post-traumatic stress, but I know it's still there. What role does Kathy, your wife, play in, I guess, helping you even to this day?
Oh God, she's my rock.
She's too good for you. Let's be clear about that.
Oh God, well, Jay, you've heard me say this many times. I mean, like I said, I should be living on a fridge box in the streets of Northern Ontario somewhere. Like yourself, Michael. My wife was a teacher and principal. Now she works for the city, the municipality I live in. So I know what it's like to live with a teacher. She is absolutely my rock, and much like you guys are talking about, she seems to start now to be able to spot things, changes, tweaks my personality long before I do, or long before I'm willing to admit it. So I'll come home from what's clearly been a bad day, and she'll say, "Oh, do you want to talk about it?" And I'll say, "Well." And she'll just say, "Yeah, you do want to talk about it, because not talking about it, you were a dick for 7 years, and I don't want to live with that again." She'll make a joke about it, right? But she can pick up on that. She knows. God, Michael.
Oh, I lost you there for a sec.
What I was saying is, after I was first diagnosed and was starting to deal with family issues and marital issues, all kinds of things all at once, she became a sponge for all things related to trauma and mental health issues. Actually earned her counseling certification. So I think half the time she's very quietly analyzing me now without letting me know. And she always seems ready with a snappy comeback when I have something to say. So it's kind of like living with a son. So I can't complain.
Wow. She's really dedicated to you, and she really loves you, Brian. That's obvious.
Yes. I don't know why. There's many times she would have been very deserving of kicking me out, and we stuck with it, and I can't imagine life without her now. And sometimes to think that I just about lost that, it's I can't believe I was that guy.
Wow.
Hey, Mike, I've got a question for you, and it's a little different than what we've been talking about. But earlier in my career, I was a media relations and public relations officer for the OPP. So you said while you were, and I love the idea that you were doing sort of a rolling column as you were, crossing the world,
Yes.
firing it back every 2 weeks. So that was keeping you with traction here. Was there interest in local media or national media where you were riding? Did people pick up on this crazy Canadian who was, riding around the world, and what is this guy doing? Or was it more when you got back to Canada? It really sort of, like you said, it sort of kicked in a high gear when you got back. But was there interest in other places as you were traveling?
There was, but not as much as if we had, let's say, a communications and PR team like yourself. So I was moving at a pretty good clip. I mean, I know I'm on a bicycle, but outside of larger countries, I'm getting through little countries quite quick, and I don't really stay that long. About every 5 or 6 days, I'd take a day of rest. So, and Ride Don't Hide It, for the first 3/4 of the global trek was very much, like I said, just being run by my wife. And so for her to sort of get ahead and say, okay, Michael, where will you be in 2 weeks? And I would sort of tell her on the map where I think I'll be in 2 weeks. And then for her to then sort of start emailing, or random calling radio stations and newspapers of, let's say, some city that I was coming to in 2 weeks proved to be quite difficult, especially with the language barrier. So we did get some radio, and we did get some newspaper for sure, and we did get some TV, but nothing like across Canada for that last chunk. And I can send you guys a link to all the interviews and stuff if you want to see a list. It is a large list, but most of it is Canadian. I think the one that really hit it out of the park, and it was just by fluke, is I ran into a BBC correspondent in Casablanca in Morocco, and that guy immediately contacted London and said, "Look, we've got this guy that's just finishing up this world trip for mental health awareness. You've got to let me do a story on him, blah blah blah," and that got picked up by the BBC, and there was another newspaper, the India Times out of Delhi or something that picked it up as well. The rest were, here and there. And, I wore the shirt. It was a shirt that said Ride Don't Hide, battling mental illness stigma one pedal at a time. And it was always meant to be a conversation starter. And like you are experiencing now, Jason and Brian, but you got to picture, this was 7 years ago and these were complete strangers. Mm-hmm. People would start getting emotional, would want to buy me a coffee, would want to buy me a drink, and would unload these stories that they've been carrying on their back. This massive fucking chip on their back that they would unload, that they'd had no one else to talk to. I mean, I can't tell you how many times I'd hear that. They'd say, this is the first time I've told anyone. I've seen full, grown men cry, people that I've only known for 20 minutes, just realizing this was a safe place for them to tell me their story, and for me to listen without them feeling judged or scared. I also had an idea that we put on the website, and it was basically people could disclose their story on the website, and you could disclose it anonymously without your name or your picture, or you could fully disclose and download a JPEG and I'm so-and-so, and your name and where you're from. And it became this big collage of people sharing their story. And then I realized that people needed a safe environment for them to tell their story. So other people would go to the website to make a declaration or a promise saying, I will look at mental health challenges in a different way. I will be supportive, whatever they were willing to promise. And so you had this beautiful collage of people making promises that it was safe to tell their story. and intermixed with other people that were telling their story. And that was really powerful. But even then, I would sometimes get these emails, because I was sort of like one of the webmasters that could get behind the website, so I could blog and things like that. And I would get these emails that would say, "I've made a mistake. Can you please take down my story? My name is whatever, John Smith. You just published it 4 hours ago. Can you please take it down? I'm really scared that someone I know will see it, or someone at work will see it. Please take it down. I'm so sorry." Like these things would just break my heart.
Yeah.
But the world has changed a lot, right? I mean, we've got things like what you're doing here, Jason, with the mental health warriors. We've got the Bell Let's Talk campaign. We've got actors and athletes, and all these people are coming out of the closet. We're starting to have a different narrative of what mental illness looks like, and so the stigma really is eroding fast.
Yeah, it really is. And it's funny because I remember after Cindy died, we hosted like seriously, it was at the end of my driveway, a lemonade stand for Mommy in Heaven, we called it. And I thought people would turn up. I mean,
Wow.
to support the kids and all that kind of stuff. I mean, we had hot dogs and just a regular lemonade stand, and we ended up raising $3,500 for CMHA. And I
Wow.
wanted, yeah, and what was crazy about it, which I never expected at all. It was I still remember my dad running back and forth to the No Frills grocery store like a maniac, trying to keep up with the hot dog orders, because there was just tons and tons of people at the end of our driveway. And what really blew me away, and I look back on it now, and I think it's just strange how I never clicked in how important what we were doing was. But I did not expect what happened with people that showed up. They started coming up to me, man, and just exactly as you said, old, young, men, women, first responders, like everybody coming up to me just in tears, talking about their stories and how they've struggled and how they've never been able to talk about it and all those things. And it just blew me away. Now, I was not in any way in any type of emotional state to be able to process exactly what that meant. I really just walked away from it at the time, being just shocked and I guess surprised that I did not think that was going to happen. It took me many years to sort of start to appreciate how important that was and what a role I could play in helping people share their story.
Yep.
Right. But yeah, just crazy. I know, Brian, I'm sure you're exactly the same with the book that you've written. I mean, God, how many people have come up to you and said the exact same thing and broken down, and just knowing that you're a safe place to land?
Well, and Jay, I think you'd agree, vulnerability breeds vulnerability, right?
Yeah.
I've had the exact same experiences as you guys. Crazy phone calls at 2 a.m. from a cop from Texas, and emails from a British soldier, and then just even at local speaking events, people will come up and, like you said, Michael, you know them for 20 minutes or 25 minutes, and they're pouring their heart out to you. And I'm curious to see how you view that. I sort of view it two ways. One, of course, I think it's incredible that you form a connection with that person. But two, I'm not quite sure if the word is sad or I guess heartbreaking a little bit is the way you used the word you used earlier, that those people are so desperate to talk to somebody and they feel they have no one in their life close enough to they can do that they connect with a stranger they've known for half an hour. I still find that stunning.
I think you nailed it on the head with the second part, the latter part, that it's sad. And I'll tell you, as the animal that we are with our complicated emotions, we have to feel empathy. There has to be a connection before you heal. And I don't care if that's like a broken ankle or coming back from the mental health challenge. You have to feel empathy. Whereas you come into work with a cast on your arm, from breaking your arm, let's say skiing, your fellow workers and your friends are going to surround you with love. They're going to write silly things on your cast, at no point is your social or professional network threatened of sort of ostracizing you. Quite the opposite. And so it goes hand in hand with healing. But the problem with the stigma of mental illness is that you're coming back from an emotional injury, and you're trying to heal, and you are actually being told inexplicitly to stay silent, otherwise you might lose social opportunities and professional opportunities. And so not only you're not getting the empathy and the necessary empathy and the healing, you're actually getting the opposite. You're getting this clear message that you're going to be ostracized if you disclose your injury. So I think what we're seeing here, Brian and Jason, when these people unload and share their darkest secrets, is they suddenly sense that not only will I not be ostracized, I will actually get the empathy that I so need to heal to the next level of healing that I would normally get just by my family, my friends, and everyday people if I walked onto a bus or walked into work with a cast on.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right.
Absolutely, yep.
So when speaking about, feeling comfortable to come forward. So you mentioned the scariest thing that you did was not the bike ride, but it was really the big reveal, I guess you could say.
Yeah.
You did that obviously before you left on the bike ride. Did that moment coincide with the fact that you were going on the bike ride and you wanted to start to create get some publicity or raise some awareness about it? And I guess what did you think would happen? Or what were you fearful of what would happen? I'm sure the exact opposite probably is what happened, but what were you afraid of?
Yeah, I mean, I had some really childish notions that I've been carrying from, watching too much TV and movies as a kid. I mean, I remember these awful scenes in Stephen King's Carrie where all these people are laughing at Carrie and all this, fictitious stuff, right? Where they're really humiliating her and laughing at her. I just really thought that I would and some of that's very real, not the laughing part, but some people do disclose and do get, and there are social repercussions and professional repercussions still to this day. And I'm sure you can speak to this, Brian, as you're in a very masculine profession, being a police officer, right? And soldiers. It's up until very recently that they can disclose their PTS, post-traumatic stress, PTSD. So it was very much a secret. I only had my immediate family and friends knew. Then when I decided with Deborah, my girlfriend at the time, my wife, that I was going to put Ride and Hide into action, many nights before going to bed, she'd say, well, you've got to go to your employer and ask for a 1.5 year leave. And inevitably, when you say that you want to do this mental health awareness event, they're going to say, well, why this cause? And you've got an option. You can either lie and say, oh, it's, I don't know, because of my brother or my uncle or whatever, or you can tell them the truth. So the first wave of disclosing outside of my immediate circle was to the Vancouver School Board. And they're a very empathetic bunch, teachers in general, not to mention it's a strong union. And I didn't really risk that much, and it was received with open arms, like we really believe in this cause. Then it was to my editor-in-chief at the newspaper, who also really received it well. And usually these are always followed up by a story of either themselves dealing with a mental health challenge or them having a family member that does. Mm-hmm. So I was coming out in waves, but by far the largest wave of disclosure was the first column that I wrote in the newspaper, which is read by 250,000 people. And basically, I used to be a party columnist. I was a society columnist covering restaurant openings and rock concerts, frivolous kind of stuff, basically a professional alcoholic. And I was sitting, yeah, it was fun. It was fun for a single guy. It was. So I basically said, I introduced my replacement columnist for that party scene for when I was gone. I said, the weekly column will be with Sarah, blah, blah, blah. And then at the end of it, I talked about what Ride Don't Hide was, and that the readers would be seeing that column. And I remember my very last sentence was, my name is Michael Schratter, and I'm bipolar. And then I hit send, and I sent it to my editor. And I was in my room with my wife looking over my shoulder, and I just broke down. And I can't tell you, I didn't stop sobbing for at least half an hour. But the weight off my back. Like ever since I was a teenager, I was spending enormous emotional energy and cognitive energy trying to always pass as normal, trying to always hide. And to fully come out of the closet like that was just a tremendous relief. Like, I mean, I'm tearing up now just thinking about it. Like, I was just a sobbing, blubbering idiot. First because I was so scared, but then finally when I hit send and that column went sent off to my editor, and I knew it was going to be published the next day, and there was no turning back. There was such a cleansing relief. Like, I just can't explain it. I only wish I had done it earlier. You know, I mean, to fully disclose who I am, to just be who I am, right? It's not like I walk down the street now and say, hey, I'm bipolar or anything stupid like that. No more than, you know, Brian walks down the street and says, hey, I deal with, you know, PTSD. But to not have to avoid it, to not have to divert conversations, you know, and just to hide. Oh, what a relief.
Oh, no kidding, man. Like, it's such a fundamental human desire to be accepted for who we really are. And so many people
Exactly.
I talk about this all the time, but people just go through life trying to be the person that they think other people want them to be. And it's just devastating on the emotionally and on your soul and your psyche. And to be able to
Totally.
take that step and hit send and be fucking free. I mean,
Yes.
God, what a moment.
Yeah, yeah. I think that was the highlight of the whole 16 months on the bike ride. You know, a couple other ones. I got engaged to my wife on Hong Kong, and then of course the last day coming into Vancouver with about 200 riders. Blah blah blah. Those were the highlights. Those three, right? And I don't even remember the man I was before Ride Don't Hide. I mean, I've just fundamentally changed as a person. I'm just comfortable in my own skin. I mean, I think that's just the big thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So what, you know, thinking back to when you're actually on the ride, I know when we talked on the phone, you saw some pretty amazing things uh, related to what other cultures are doing around mental health. And as you said earlier, that was one of the things that you were writing about. What are some of the initiatives or things that you saw in different countries that really stood out for you as a model of maybe what we can think about bringing back here?
Well, Canada is very progressive, and so we are already, you know, off to a good start here, being Canadian. But back in 2010 and 11, by far out of the countries I was in, that was leading the charge was Australia, and it was done actually by a now retired, well-connected and powerful politician who had who had a daughter, still has a daughter, and she lost one of her best friends to suicide. The daughter did, and the politician really saw, you know, his daughter suffer because of the loss of her friend, and her friendship circle really sort of go through a lot of turbulence. And so he really put forth to the Australian federal government to really draw attention to this. And you could really see that back in 2010 and 11, and I'm sure they're even, you know, more ahead now. But I would be cycling along on the highway, and about every two days or so, I would see a billboard that would be mental health related, and it would say something like, you know, feeling blue, you're not alone, right? You know, contact us here at blah 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 blah. These billboards would come up about every 2 days on the highway as I was cycling. Well, every 2 days as I'm cycling is probably every 3 or 4 hours in a car. So you can imagine the positive messaging as you're driving down a highway, you know, to see those billboards. That was really cool. The same initiative, and that was called Beyond Blue. The organization that was putting up those billboards in Australia was called Beyond Blue. And they also came up with something called men's sheds. And I think I told you about this, Jason. But it's very much like your online support group, Jason, with mental health warriors. Australian men are a very macho kind of group, if I'm making a generalization. And the term shed in Australia refers to the garage. It's where you tinker on the motorbike. It's where you do some woodwork. It's where you have some beers with the guys, whatever. And money was gathered. And what they started to do is in cities and in neighborhoods, they would create these mental health men only gathering places called the men's sheds. And guys would come there to tinker on their motorbike or paint a birdhouse or whatever. And they wouldn't directly come there for counseling, or they wouldn't directly come there to learn about their mental health. But that was the sort of subtext. You would come to just hang out with some guys and have some beers or whatever and coffee and be an Australian macho bloke. But with the underground sort of subtext of them learning about their mental health and learning to disclose and not be ashamed and have guys sharing, the way some women have been doing for decades at book clubs or at tea parties. So these men's sheds really started to take off in Australia when I was there. As you guys know, I mean, the suicide rate amongst men is men and women both attempt suicide at about the same rate, but men are 5 times more likely to succeed with it. And we're still dealing with those sort of, bullshit notions of what it means to be a man, which is basically strong and silent and just, stiff upper lip. And that basically kills us.
Yeah, it sure does. I mean, I know Brian can certainly speak to that from policing culture, but I love that idea of men's sheds. What a great idea!
I know.
For, like an actual physical place. We do it online, but the idea of a physical place for people to come together and just be able to be themselves. I love that idea because I think that one of the things we sometimes can miss, right, is especially with the proliferation of online technology and being able to connect with people all around the world. Sometimes I worry about the fact that we're not connecting with the people, or we're missing an opportunity or overlooking an opportunity to connect with the people that are right under our noses in the communities that we live in. So I love that idea.
We need a rich benefactor. We need Canadian real estate prices are, of course, going through the roof, but I think as your mental health warriors grows online, I think we might attract or try to solicit, some philanthropist that perhaps is able to, buy a house or buy a shed, in an industrial area of town, I don't know, like basically a big shed. And maybe that is possible. I'm not sure what the real estate prices are like in London, but in Vancouver, the problem is they're just so expensive.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, it's nothing's as ridiculous as Vancouver. Where it's way cheaper to buy a property here.
So maybe that is a possibility. I mean, you never know, guys. You never know.
Michael, it's funny. I don't know if you noticed, but there's how many would you say guys from Australia, Jay, in the group? 5 or 6, maybe?
Yeah, I would say 5 or 6.
And most of them are very progressive. Really, really very progressive in their attitude towards mental health and talking about it. And a lot of the programs that I've seen adapted for use in the emergency service world, like, for example, I'm certified to instruct in a program called Manners. That came from Ambulance Victoria in Australia. There's a couple programs that the Canadian Forces have adopted, and they were taken from the Australian model. So clearly, as you noticed, 7 or 8 years ago when you were traveling through there, they seem to be sort of bleeding edge when it comes to acknowledging that, mental health should be no more of a issue to talk about than, like you said, you break your leg, you break your wrist, you throw out your back, and everybody wants to hear your story. Everybody wants to, crowd around, like you said, sign your cast or whatever. But you come in after, if you came in after missing a week off and said, yeah, I took a week off just to get my head straight,
right?
You'd get the funny looks, you'd get the stares, and so in that sense, I think we still have a long way to go.
Yeah, I agree. And to give you an idea of how much hiding is still going on, they and it didn't matter whether I was in England or in Western Europe or United States, 1 in 5, roughly the the sociologists feel 1 in 5 people deal with a mental health challenge in a given year. So in Canada, that's 7 million Canadians. That's about a fifth of our population. Where are those 7 million Canadians? Right?
Right.
Only recently are the numbers starting to make themselves visible. A study was done, I think it was around 2007. Even if you're not a bleeding heart liberal like I am, just from an economic standpoint, mental health challenges cost our economy more than the other two largest afflictions combined, which are cancer and heart and stroke. It's something like $50 billion a year, from missing a day off work to, mom not being able to take, let's say, their kid into the ice hockey rink in the morning. Like, it's a huge drag to our economy. So just from that perspective alone, and yet, why is it that our universal healthcare doesn't cover this? I mean, sure, if you really hurt yourself, you're going to see a psychiatrist, right? If you end up in the hospital with a breakdown, but there's no, you have to have a really good extended healthcare plan to be able to afford psychologist visits, and visiting a psychologist, or and even then you only probably get 2 or 3 visits. So there's this inherent stigma that's built in that's in the actual structure of our healthcare system that still has to change. You show up with a lump in your breast and you'll get the best health, cancer treatment and millions of dollars of machinery and millions of dollars of the world's best, cancer specialists right away to save your life. But you just don't get that if you have a mental health crisis.
Yeah, and I think too, one aspect of it that we don't consider is, the cost of human connection, right? The lost cost as we our society evolves and we become more self-sufficient, we become wealthier, we really are becoming less connected with one another. We don't need people like we used to, where we depended on our neighbors. And I think I've read some really interesting book. Actually, we're talking about it in the group tomorrow. It's called Tribe. And the premise of the book is that one of the reasons that mental health issues are skyrocketing is our fundamental loss of a lot of human connection with one another. And I sometimes wonder.
Totally agree with that. Totally agree.
Yeah. Because what do people do? Like, they isolate themselves. He was talking about in the book, for example, he's looking at native cultures and how it's very egalitarian, but not egalitarian like forced egalitarian in the sense that it's just a part of the culture. Everybody's got a role to play. The survival of the tribe depends on everybody stepping up and playing their role. They care for people when they come back for battle and all of this kind of stuff. And even when people, in the odd case where people might have something like a real mental illness, like schizophrenia, in a lot of cultures they're revered, right? They're not isolated; they're accepted for who they are, or they're seen as having even mystical powers in some cultures.
Exactly.
So a lot of the things that we face in today's culture, they don't exist. They didn't exist in those, and I'm really becoming quite fascinated with that whole thing, because I think there's just not enough research that's been done. But talking about human connection, what I love about what we're doing and what you're doing, and what I loved about the vibe that I got from Ride Don't Hide when I was there, and I want to shout it from the rooftops, is that connecting with people, or say coming out of the closet, as it were, does not have to be. There's a million ways to do that, right? And it doesn't have to be like doing what you did, which is the big reveal to a whole bunch of people. That's one way to do it.
Well, that's
sure.
crazy. That's over the top. It's not.
Yeah, right. But what you can do is you look at something like Ride Don't Hide, and you think of the normal objections people might have. Well, okay, I don't want to go there and share my story, but I'm not in shape. I can't ride a bike or whatever. But just go there. Like, just go there and stand off to the side and absorb the energy of a whole bunch of people coming together to try doing something positive and trying to make a difference. Even if you don't talk to a single person, you will be different as a result of having attended that event than if you hadn't gone. It's creating that connection, and stepping out is a process. It's a journey, but God, there's a million ways to do it.
You nailed it. We have that out in Vancouver too. We have people coming out to volunteer, or just to be in the scene, and they don't ride a bike. I mean, the distances are very small. There's large distances and long distances. You can do a 100-kilometer ride, or you can do a 10-kilometer ride. But there's some people that don't even own a bike, but they do come, and you nailed it on the head, Jason. It's that in itself, I think, is cathartic.
Oh God, yeah.
Yeah, it sure is. Okay, well, we're coming up to about an hour here, so I don't know. This is a great conversation. I'm so glad we crossed paths. Brian, do you have anything else that you want to ask Michael? Oh, I have a question, but you go first, Brian, if you have anything else.
I was just going to say the thing that kind of keeps hitting me, Michael, and we haven't said it, come right out and said it, but I love the fact that you have, through Ride Don't Hide, you've connected the concept of healthy body, healthy mind, right?
Yeah.
I firmly believe in that. My wife and I constantly preach self-care when we do our presentations to first responder groups or spouses or whatever. So I think the fact that you have, clearly you have a passion for cycling, but I think the fact that you are showing, and it goes along with what Jason said about, just show up, like just do something, get the body moving, get your body active, and generally the mind follows, right? There's not a whole lot of people who are constantly busy or who are doing something and who are just letting their mind,
Yes.
sort of stagnate. And I cannot tell you how many, when I was doing research for my book, I guess it'd be 2 years ago now, 2.5 years.
Yes.
I can't tell you how many. I interviewed a couple hundred first responders and military from across North America, and I'd say probably 90% of them said that they found release and they found therapy, for lack of a better term, in exercise, whether it be running, kayaking, biking, lifting weights,
Yes.
whatever. So I love the fact that you've blended those together and you put those into one package. I think it's fantastic.
I totally agree with you. And getting back to perhaps why we're seeing an increase in mental health incidences, we talked about the disconnect as we we're always on our phone texting instead of face-to-face encounters. The second aspect, we're becoming more sedate as a society. Our children are becoming more sedate. They're not out climbing trees, playing soccer in the fields,
Mm-hmm.
kicking the can. And I think that is also exactly like you're saying, Brian. We're not meant to be sedate. We're meant to be using our bodies.
Oh, totally. It's fun. Sorry, go ahead, Brian.
I was going to say kick the can. I haven't heard that in, God, years. I forgot about that game.
I know, and I don't even know if kids today know what it is.
Probably not. They're probably look online for a virtual version of it somehow.
Yes.
Yeah. It's funny with in our backyard for the longest time. Actually, in our backyard, the only things that the kids have is a rope that's hanging from a 25-foot tree and a trampoline. For the longest time, they only had the rope, actually. And the stuff they came up with over the years for that, just watching them use their imagination.
Yes.
And letting boredom be
Right.
a catalyst for creativity, I think, is something that we totally, to the detriment of our children, we've totally let slide, right? Boredom is a wonderful place to be in, and the things that come out of that is your mind wanders and you look for ways to try to get out of that boredom. It's just crazy what kids can come up with. So I totally agree with what you guys are saying.
Nailed it. Yeah. And guys, I just want to say something different on a different note, but I really believe it, and I think we're going to see this eventually, that the underpinnings of mental illness are also perhaps the underpinnings of some forms of extraordinary human greatness. And we've talked about it always, at least tonight, in the form of a disease or a disability that has to be accepted and opened up, to open arms with empathy, which it does. But the more I read and the more I do research and the more I see as a teacher, if you think, no one's born with the mental illness, but you might be born with a very sensitive, highly aware, personality, right? Like a very empathetic, highly sensitive personality. And then life's events for some of those sensitive types is so traumatic for for numerous reasons, then the mental illness forms. But we don't want to forget, I guess, that the basis of that is a very sensitive and observant personality. And when you look at some of the people that have shaped our culture, from Steve Jobs, who's bipolar, to Beethoven, to Winston Churchill, to Lincoln, some of the greatest presidents, leaders, visionaries, musicians, artists, from Johnny Depp to Mel Gibson, to Lady Gaga, to Madonna. I mean, a lot of them are or dealing with or have dealt with a mental illness. And it doesn't start with it being a disability and a sickness. It starts actually as a gift to the culture in question. Is just some people get battered along the way, and that's where the mental illness arises.
Oh man, you know what? I totally agree with you. We are actually doing a podcast coming up. We haven't scheduled it yet, but it's going to be with Sabrina Bryan, and it's going to be about the myth of normal, because I think that we put people in a box. We have a very small box that we think people should do. You should go to public school, you should go to college or university, you should get a job, you should pay your taxes. There's a list of acceptable things you can do, and if you don't produce in the way that you're supposed to, you're labeled as there's being something wrong with you, of not fitting in, of being a freak, and those are the people in my mind that should be fucking celebrated, because I exactly agree with you. Some of the greatest artists and creative people in the history of the world. You can call it mental illness or you can call it whatever you want, but you know what? It's whatever it is. It's the fact there's 7 billion people on this earth, and every single one of us is different, and there is no such thing as normal. And the sooner we stop trying to conform to somebody else's notion of normal, the sooner we'll be able to be fully self-expressed and live the life that we were meant to live. Wow, I felt like I was on a soapbox there.
That was
you nailed it.
So one last question before we let you go, brother, and that is, on your adventure, what is the wildest thing that you saw?
Well, there's a lot. There's a lot when you're on the road for 16 months, but I'd have to say there were two. There's one in Cambodia. It was the right time of the season, and all the tarantulas were coming out of the ground, and it's a delicacy, and they deep fry them, and they're being sold on the side of the road. They look like stiff, fake large spiders, stiff, and they're crackly, and I took one bite. That's as far as I could go. But those were sold as a delicacy, deep fried tarantulas. But I think it was early on the trip. I was in the Baja, and I met up with some Americans that were there, and I took a day off, and we went out on a fishing trip in the Sea of Cortez, the Gulf of California. There, the body of water in between the Baja and mainland Mexico. And turns out that when I was there in September, whale sharks were coming down there to have their babies. And this massive whale shark, which is the largest fish in the world, but it's a plankton eater, went by the boat, and I grabbed a mast and I jumped in the water and was swimming with this thing that was, the size of a school bus. That was pretty freaking cool.
I've done that actually.
Oh, there you go. Did it blow your mind as well?
Oh, yeah. And how slow they move and how gentle they are. I mean, you're right. These things are literally, they can be like 40, 45 feet long.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's amazing.
Yeah.
Cool. Well, hey, man, this has been a wonderful, wonderful conversation. I'm just blown away by how you took, difficulties in your life and just turned them into, you've started a movement that is changing people's lives and eradicating stigma and changing our culture. And that is, man, what a legacy to leave behind. I know you're a modest guy, and I know there's a million other people involved, but the idea was born. And isn't it ironic and ironically beautiful that the idea was born at a point when you were experiencing mania, right? Yeah. And that actually illustrates perfectly the point we were just making, doesn't it?
It does kind of, doesn't it? It is.
Yeah.
Jason,
So
Brian, I want to thank you so much for this opportunity to talk about this and to get to know you guys better. I'm really
Oh,
privileged
our,
to be
our,
part of this.
our pleasure. If Michael, if our listeners want to hear a little bit more about what you're doing, what's the best way to look you up? Facebook, website, where would you send people?
Sure, Facebook. I'm part of the Facebook group that we're part of, or they can reach me at michael@ridedon'thide.com.
Awesome. This was an excellent conversation, Michael. We really enjoyed it.
Yes, me too. Thanks, guys. You made my night.
Take care, brother.
Yeah, bye.
Yeah, so there you have it. Just a small bike ride for 40,000 kilometers, eating some tarantulas in Cambodia. Just another day at the office. It's kind of really how I spend most of my days too. But listen, thanks, Michael, for the awesome conversation and the amazing adventure, man. It was really just awesome listening to you describe that, and what an amazing thing to take on. So super inspiring, and keep up the good work with Ride Don't Hide, man. It's growing all the time, and it's helping more and more people, and that's what it is all about. And I'll end this episode the same way I end every single episode, and that's by saying, listen, if you've struggled, I want you to know that I have struggled too. And if you ever want to talk to me, I will not judge you. So please consider giving that gift to another human being today. You could change somebody's life forever. Until next time.